بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, after praising Allah and sending salat and salam on the finest of creation, the Messenger Muhammad, we'll begin with a short benefit from a book called Tashih al-Du'a. Tashih al-Du'a. وهو it's a book written by the scholar, the well-known and virtuous scholar Sheikh Bakr ibn Abdullah Abu Zayd rahimahullah ta'ala. He died a few years ago. May Allah ta'ala reward him for the works that he put forth, and allow us to benefit from the good of them. He said in this great book, Tashih al-Du'a, which is a book that shows his ghira, his love, and his need to, or the efforts that he undertook to defend the sunnah and to propagate the sunnah in light of the deviations of the people of modern day practices. He has a section in there called التمايل عند الذكر والدعاء, leaning back and forth when a person makes dhikr or du'a. And you see this as a somewhat of a common practice amongst the Muslims in many places. You may see people who are not able to stand in salat properly, standing with proper submission to Allah, but instead they sway back and forth. They sway back and forth like this. Right? They may be doing it intentionally. It may have come from an ill practice which is rooted in the Quran study circles, where children are taught to sway back and forth when they read the Quran. Children are taught to sway like this when they read the Quran, and sometimes from the front to the back, and from the front to the back like that. They're taught to sway, and they're taught that it helps them to memorize. And if they are not taught it explicitly like this, they are taught it implicitly. And what I mean by that is they are taught by example. The teacher or the leading students, they all practice this, and it is taken as an Islamic practice. So we'd like to look at what one of our scholars has said regarding this action, which you may be surprised to find that it is not only impermissible, but it is from the religion of the Jews and not the religion of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He says in this chapter, at-tamayul, he gives a definition of at-tamayul because we're talking about leaning. He says, at-tamayul huwa at-taharruk yaminan wa shimalan aw min amamin wa khalfin sawa'an bil-ra'si aw bil-badan. So what he intends here with this speech about swaying or you could say, what would you call this? Swaying back and forth, I guess. He intends whether it's done with just the head or the whole body, this swaying. Either front to back or left to right. That is all intended by these words that you are about to study today. What taharruk and movement or shaking is what he intended by that. Its actual meaning. Wal-ihtizaz, he gives another word that is a kind of word that is taken by the Jews as an act of worship. Al-ihtizaz, it's like shaking vigorously into different directions, kind of like this, in all different directions, kind of randomly, quickly, with jerking motions. What tawajud? At-tawajud is a word used by the Sufis, and it includes all of these things. And many things other than these things. He said, وَالتَّوَاجُدُ أَشْمَلْ مِنَ الْمَذْكُورَاتِ. It's more inclusive than everything mentioned here. فَهُوَ مَا يَحْصُلُ مِنْ ثَمَرَاتِ الْأَوْرَادِ بِمَا يَتَكَلَّفَهُ الْعَبْدُ من حركات ظاهرة من تمايل وتحرك واهتزاز وضرب بالأرجل وللصدر وصاعق ورقص وتصفيق وضرب وغشيان. It's a comprehensive idea, including everything that has been mentioned, and it is the culmination of the phrases of dhikr or so-called dhikr that the people burden themselves with, moving around with movements, swaying back and forth and shaking and stomping with their feet sometimes, and perhaps stomping or hitting their chests, and perhaps falling out as if to be overwhelmed by the dhikr, or dancing, clapping, striking oneself or others, and even passing out. وَهُوَ فِي أَصْلِهِ مِنْ دِينِ الْكُفَّارِ. Listen to this, the actions of these deviant Sufis. It is in its origin from the religion of the kuffar, عباد العجل, the worshippers of the calf. وَقَدْ ذَكَرَ اللَّهُ فِي سُورَةِ طَاهَ, and Allah Ta'ala had mentioned in Surah Taha, أصحاب السامري, those who worship the calf with a samiri, لَمَّا اتَّخَذُوا عِجْلًا جَسَدًا لَهُ خُوَارٍ, when they had taken that beautified golden calf. وَذَكَرَ الْمُفَسِّرُونَ, they had taken it, of course, as an object of worship. وَذَكَرَ الْمُفَسِّرُونَ أَنَّهُمْ كَانُوا يَرْقُصُونَ حَوْلَهُ وَيَتَوَاجَدُونَ, they used to dance around it, and they were performing tawajud, meaning they were becoming overwhelmed with the passion of their worship, as the Sufis do. And the word tawajud has been defined here as swinging, swaying, beating one's chest, and all of those actions that have preceded. وَقَدْ ذَكَرَ, here's what Sheikh Bakr says next. وَقَدْ ذَكَرَ الزَّمَخْشَرِي عند تفسيره. He's quoting from the tafsir of Zamakhshari, al-Kashaf. This tafsir is not for students of knowledge or for beginners in Islam to read at all. However, what the ulama of Ahl Sunnah choose to convey from that book is something that we can pay attention to. That doesn't mean that it is from our resources and that we should go and use this book to research, as this book has many different kinds of bid'ah, of innovation in it. And its author, Az-Zamakhshari, is known for al-i'tizal. He's mu'tazili, and he has lots of innovation. However, our Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd here has chosen a passage from this book, and he has chosen that from the tafsir of Az-Zamakhshari for this ayat. وَإِذْ نَتَقَنَا الْجَبَلَ فَوْقَهُمْ كَأَنَّهُ ذُلَّةٌ وَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُ وَاقِعٌ بِهِمْ. Regarding this verse, when Allah Ta'ala had lifted the mountain above them, and it was like a hovering over them and shading them, and they thought it was going to fall down upon them. And Abu Hayyan also quotes Az-Zamakhshari with this passage. Abu Hayyan is the author of Al-Bahr al-Muhit in tafsir. He said, أن التمايل عند القراءة كان من عمل اليهود عند قراءة التوراة. He says that Zamakhshari said that this swaying back and forth when a person reads, when a person performs reading, he says this was from the way of the Jews when they used to read the Torah. From the way of the Jews when they used to read the Torah. In the قراءة التوراة. وقد سقت ذلك مع غيره في بدع القراء بما نصه. And I have mentioned this, or I have relayed this in the book called بدع القراء, the Ahlan bi Abdul Hakim, and the book is called Bida' al-Qurra, the innovations that are done by the Imams and the reciters of the Quran. And he quotes his own book. That's the book of Sheikh Bakr as well. He says, Al-Mabhath al-Thalith, the third chapter, في التحرك عند القراءة, regarding movements when a person reads, meaning intended movements as acts of worship when a person reads. اشتدت كلمة علماء الأندلس في النكير على التمايل والاهتزاز والتحرك عند قراءة القرآن. He said the position of the scholars of Al-Andalus of old, they were very, very serious against this kind of action, this leaning, swaying and shaking and moving when a person reads the Quran. وأنها بدعة يهود, and that it was an innovation having an origin with some of the Jews. تسربت إلى المشارق المصريين, and it had reached its way, it had made its way to the eastern, the people of the east in the Egyptians. ولم يكن شيء من ذلك مأثورا عن صالح سلف هذه الأمة. and nothing of that had been recorded or reported from the righteous of the Salaf of this Ummah, the righteous predecessors of this Ummah. وَقَدْ أَلَّفَ, and these are the words of, again, Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd, rahimahullah. وَقَدْ أَلَّفَ ناصر السنة Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, the great Maliki scholar, Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, the aider of the Sunnah, had authored a book, rahimahullah ta'ala, may Allah have mercy on him. He died in the year 386. كتاب من تأخذه عند قراءة القرآن حركة. He authored a book called the Book of regarding the one who began to move and shake, or the one who began to move because of his reading, or once he began reading the Quran. ولا ندري من خبر هذا الكتاب شيئا. And I know nothing of the reality of this book and what is in it. And that is mentioned by Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd. He doesn't know what was in that book, but it has been discussed by Ibn Abi Zayd. Ibn Abi Zayd is the author, the famous Maliki scholar, and the author of the famous Muqaddimah in Aqeedah, talking about the foundations of the Aqeedah of Ahl Sunnah, one of the main sources for Ahl Sunnah and their Aqeedah, of their early Aqeedah of Ahl Sunnah. قال أبو حيان النحوي محمد بن يوسف al-Andalusi, he's quoting now Ibn Abu Hayyan, who's the author of Al-Bahr al-Muhit in Tafsir, and his name was Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Andalusi. He died in the year 745. Rahimahullah ta'ala, may Allah ta'ala have mercy on him. Fi tafsirihi al-Bahr al-Muhit, in his tafsir called Al-Bahr al-Muhit, عند قول الله تعالى وإذ نتقنا الجبل فوقهم كأنه ظلة وظنوا أنه واقع بهم, regarding the verse, again that verse is from Surah A'raf, the 171st verse, when we raised the mountain above them and held it above them like it was, and it was shading them, and they thought it was going to come down upon them. He quotes قال الزمخشري في الكشاف. He quotes Abu Hayyan quoting الزمخشري لما نشر موسى عليه السلام الألواح, when Musa came back and had the tablets with revelation on them, وفيها كتاب الله تعالى, having the book of Allah written on these tablets, ولم يبق شجر أو لم يبق شجر ولا جبل ولا حجر إلا اهتز. This is narrated from the Jews that what? No tree or mountain or rock existed except that it shook. It shook. فَلِذَلِكَ, and due to this reported incident, due to this, لا ترى يهوديا يقرأ التوراة إلا اهتز وأنغض لها رأسه. انتهى من الكشاف. He said, and due to this related event, whether it's actually something that happened or not, this is what the Jews have used as the grounds for their act of worship, that when they read the Torah, their book, which they claim is the message of Musa, that when they read that, you find them shaking and moving and lowering their heads, swaying their heads back and forth, as you may have seen the Jews doing at their Wailing Wall and in other places. And this is the end of the quote from Az-Zamakhshari's book Al-Kashaf. وقد سرت هذه النزعة إلى أولاد المسلمين, and this thing that has been taken from the Jews has reached the children of the Muslims. فيما رأيت بديار مصر, and I have seen this in the lands of Egypt. And we're talking about the Andalusian scholar Abu Hayyan, the author of Tafsir al-Bahr al-Muhit. He's saying, after quoting Zamakhshari, and I have seen this today in Egypt. تراهم في المكتب, you'll see them in the schools. The maktab was the early school for the children. They would read the Quran and they would learn their basic teachings there. إذا قرأوا القرآن يهتزون ويحركون رؤوسهم. You'll see that, just like the Jews, in this school, they would read the Quran, and when they read the Quran, they would begin shaking and moving their heads, as mentioned. وَأَمَّا فِي بِلَادِنَا, as for in our land, and of course he's talking about Al-Andalus, which was a major power in Islamic knowledge and might for the Ummah of Islam in that era. He says, as for Al-Andalus, وَالْغَرْب, and the western areas, فَلَوْ تَحَرَّكَ الصَّغِيرٌ عِنْدَ قِرَاءَةِ الْقُرْآنِ. Look at how they were more established on the Sunnah in this issue than Egypt, which was closer to the Asl of Islam and closer to the Hijaz. They said if a young man was going to start shaking when he read the Quran with us, أَدَّبَهُ مُؤَدِّبُ الْمَكْتَبِ وَقَالَ لَهُ لَا تَتَحَرَّكْ. Then the one responsible for discipline in the school would discipline him, and he would say to him, don't shake and don't move, فَتُشْبِهُ الْيَهُودَ فِي الدِّرَاسَةِ, so that you might resemble the Jews in how they study. Don't shake and don't move back and forth when you read the Quran, lest you resemble the Jews in the way that they study. وقال الراعي الأندلسي, and another scholar from Al-Andalus said, this one died about a century after Abu Hayyan, may Allah have mercy on him, in his book انتصار الفقير السالك, he said, وكذلك وافق أهل مصر اليهود أو أهل مصر اليهود, and thus the people of Egypt have coincided with the Jews in their actions. في الاهتزاز عند الدرس والاشتغال وهو من أفعال يهود. So the people of Egypt thus had become similar, or had become corresponding to the actions of the Jews and how they shake when they study and when they busy themselves. And this is from the actions of some of the Jews. Intaha, and that is the end of the quote from Ar-Ra'i al-Andalusi. And Sheikh Bakr says, وَهَذَا أَعَمْ, and this is even more general, meaning not just specific to dhikr and qira'ah, but in general studying. So فَلْيُجْتَنَبْ, so let it be that we stay away from this kind of thing. Let this thing be distant from us. And you find it, this is my note, you find this as a common theme in the Haram. You find it in the Haram Makki, Haram Madani. You find it many times in the Quran study circles, even in lessons of Islamic knowledge. People sitting on the floor and they're shaking back and forth, swaying back and forth, believing this to be either piety, to be some kind of manner of passing the time while you wait for the class, or such. However, as our Shaykh mentions here, he's going to give an admonishment now before he closes this topic. He says, فَعَلَى الذَّاكِرِينَ اللَّهَ وَالْمُتَوَجِّهِينَ بِالدُّعَاءِ إِلَى اللَّهِ وعلى حفاظ كتاب الله والقائمين على مدارس وحلق تحفيظ القرآن الكريم ترك بدعة التمايل عند القراءة. So let it be known that, or let it be that those who remember Allah, the people who make dhikr, and those who try to draw close to Allah with supplications, and especially or more so those who are the memorizers of the book of Allah, and those who are responsible for schools, those who are school administrators, and those who are responsible for the schools that memorize the Quran, the schools that teach the memorization of the Quran, let them abandon the innovation of swaying when one reads the Quran. وَأَنْ يُرَبُّ أَوْلَادَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ عَلَى السُّنَّةِ. Let the people raise or cultivate the youth of the Muslims upon the Sunnah. وَالنَّفَرَ مِنَ الْبِدْعَةِ, and staying away from and fleeing from bid'ah. وَلَا تَغْتَرْ, he continues in his admonishment here, وَلَا تَغْتَرَّ بِمَا يُبْدِيهِ الطُّرُقِيَّةُ مِنْ أَدِلَّةٍ المشروعية أو من أدلة لمشروعية الرقص عند الذكر. Do not be deceived and do not be deluded by the apparent proofs of the Sufis who follow the turuqat, the Sufis of the turuqs, of the different Sufi ways, from the proofs that they claim establish the permissibility or the legislated nature of dancing when making dhikr. فإنها بين دليل صحيح لكن لا يدل على المراد. It's either an authentic evidence, but it has no actual proof in it for what they're saying. أو ضعيف لا يمكن قبوله سندا بحال, or it's a weak evidence that has no way we could ever accept it as a proof. ومن نظر في البحوث والرسائل المؤلفة في مشروعيته من بعض غلاة الطرقية عرف بطلان دلائلهم معنى وسندا. And anybody who would take a look at what they have written in their research and in their articles that try to support the legislated nature of these actions written by the more severe of the Sufis of the Turuq, he would know clearly the falsehood of their angles of proofs. He would know that by way of the meanings of the arguments and by the chains of narration. وَمِنْهَا مَا فِي التَّرَاتِيبِ الْإِدَارِيَّةِ. And he gives an example of the falsehood that has been collected in some writings, in the writings of al-Kattani, called the Taratib al-Idariyya. Wallahu al-Musta'an. And he finishes by saying, and Allah Ta'ala is al-Musta'an, meaning Allah Ta'ala is the only one that we seek for aid. Again, that was reading a short passage from the beneficial book called what? Tashih ad-Du'a. You can see it there on your screen. Tashih ad-Du'a by who? Sheikh Bakr bin Abdullah Abu Zayd, rahimahullah ta'ala. We ask Allah Ta'ala to give us benefit from what we have learned, to excuse us for what we have done wrong, and to guide us to good statements and actions. وصلى اللهم وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والله تعالى أعلم. Naam. I originally opened this room for our brother Abdul Hakim. He had a question. I don't know if he's here now. He's not here. He was having some difficulties with his connection. Walhamdulillah. So, with that, this was just a quick benefit I wanted to share from a very excellent book from one of our scholars, rahimahullah ta'ala. So I hope that, inshallah, the benefit was accomplished, and that perhaps I did make a recording of this as well. So I'll make the recording available, and perhaps it can reach more people, and the benefit can spread, and we can be aware of what is so commonly it takes place. What's really sad is that not only does this action take place, but it becomes the norm. It becomes the norm so much that people sway and swing back and forth in their dhikr, in their dua, and it affects their salat, their formal salat, doesn't it? You find people standing in salat, they don't want your shoulder next to their shoulder. Why is that? Because they're used to swaying. They need some space to sway back and forth. And they feel like once you connect with them and practice the sunnah of the companions that was done in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was done by his order when he said, "La tad'u furujatin lish-shaytan," don't leave gaps for the shaytan. When this was done by the companions and established as our deen in the time of prophethood, there was no negative reaction from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was only condoning the action. It was only legislated through his order, his command, and through the implementation of the Sahaba, that they connected their shoulders to the shoulder of the person next to them, and they connected their ankles to the ankle of the person next to them in the salat. The people who sway back and forth in the salat, they can't stand this, because this means that they will be prevented from swaying. But walhamdulillah, we can connect this to another abandoned or neglected sunnah, and that is the standing in the prayer rows properly, abandoning all gaps and closing and filling all of the gaps. This will help our brothers who cannot control themselves to stop swaying and swinging in their salat. Since once your shoulder is connected to your brother's shoulder, there is no swaying. There is only submissiveness and standing qanitin, standing in devout obedience, as we have been ordered to do. وَحَافِظُوا عَلَى الصَّلَوَاتِ وَالصَّلَاةِ الْوُسْطَى وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ. And take care of the salat, all the different salats there are, especially the wusta salat. And the scholar said that salat al-asr. And stand before Allah devoutly. Stand before Allah devoutly. This is qiyam. True standing before Allah. It doesn't include swaying or swinging or leaning this way and that way. Rather, it is devout submissiveness, khudu' and khushu', istislam, surrendering oneself to Allah with this act of worship. So it is enough of a sign of a corrupt action that the swaying that one does when he reads will take its place in his recitation of the Quran when he is praying in formal salat, when it more obviously has no place. However, as our Sheikh today, Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd, mentioned, that it has no place outside of the salat as a foundation. It has no place in our study circles. It has no place in the circles of memorization of the Quran. It is from the bid'ah of the Yahud. It's from the innovations of the Yahud, and it is not from the religion of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. No. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. So we will ask the brothers and sisters to convey that, inshallah. If the audio reaches them, convey it and warn people if they've seen this action. Warn them from the actions that violate the integrity of their salat and that violate the integrity of their practice of Islam according to the Prophet's Sunnah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, which is free of the innovations of the Sufis and the innovations of the Jews and resemblance to the disbelieving people, specifically those whom Allah Ta'ala's anger is upon, the Jews. May Allah Ta'ala give us honor and knowledge of the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam and give us distance and hatred for violations of his Sunnah. Sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.